Well, I think I found out why the tire's going flat. That's our leak right there. Hey everyone, so we're getting ready to take extra parts out to the drag strip and see what it'll run around 700 feet elevation here. But we got a few things that we got to fix first. I don't know if you noticed in the last video, but that starter is not sounding good. So we're gonna fix the starter. Got a flat tire. We were pulling it in the garage to fix that other stuff, and somebody ran over a nail, and it wasn't amber. And it's through the sidewall, so that's gonna be more in depth than just fixing a tire. And power steering pump is leaking. And I thought I had it fixed, but obviously I don't. So we already put a seal in it. So we ordered a new power steering pump. I can't see how a new pump can't fix a leaking old pump, but we'll see how that goes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna swap the rotors to small bolt pattern rotors. And the reason we're doing that is this is 5 on 5.5. There's just not a lot of wheels available for that bolt pattern. And I am sure that you can swap the rotors with the ones off of an earlier truck with the small bolt pattern and everything should go together just fine. So we're gonna try it. So the first step is take the tire off. You gotta take these bolts right here out of the top of the caliper. A couple of retainers on here. This is what holds your caliper on, so if these aren't in good shape, probably not a bad idea to replace them. They're not that expensive, but these ones look okay. I have a few extras if we find a bad one. So once that's out of the way, you should be able to slide the caliper off just like that. And then I wouldn't let this hang by the hose because it's not good for it. We're gonna prop that up right there for now. Just take channel locks and what you're trying not to do, or what I'm trying not to do, is bend the crap out of the cap. There we go. Comes right out. Look what I found. So this is the proper tool for this job. And then you should have a cotter pin in here. That one feels a little weak. I'm gonna have to find a new cotter pin. And you should be able to tap it out, grab the other side, and I just throw them in the cap so I don't lose them. And you have this little retainer piece here. And then that nut. Sometimes those nuts will be like hand tight, but that's really not a huge deal because when you put these together, the bearings will kind of wear and mesh to each other. And a lot of times this nut won't be super tight when you take it back apart. And in my experience, that's been okay. As long as you had it nice and tight and there's no play in it, the retainer is gonna hold it tight. You don't wanna have a bunch of pressure on that because it'll just hold the bearings from turning. You should have a washer in there. We'll have the bearing. That should come right off. And then we're gonna take the bearing and the whole rotor over here and see if this is actually gonna work. This is not a seal puller, but it's kind of shaped like one. So we're gonna see if we can get the seal out with this. Yep, came right out. You wanna replace that. And then you get your bearing in the back. And it appears our bearings look okay. What you're looking for is pitting or galling or anything to tell you that the bearings have been hot. They should be nice and shiny, and if you wipe them off, you can see the rollers are in good shape. There's no pitting or anything on them, so we're gonna reuse those. There's a few measurements that are extremely important here. The first one is gonna be that they're the same diameter, and they're the same diameter. Then your bearing should go in here and it should fit nice and tight. It's hard to explain how you know that it's right, but if it's sitting in there and it doesn't wobble around and it doesn't cock side to side, that should be right. And I've checked, part number for the bearings for both of these trucks is the same. And then the last one that is important, which is gonna be really nearly impossible to measure sitting here on a bench, the distance between the bearings needs to be the exact same or super, super, super close. Like I said, this truck, if you buy a aftermarket drop spindle, it calls for the same spindle for all years. So that tells me that it should be the same snout on the spindle regardless of the year or the bolt pattern the truck is. So I'm gonna say that rotor's gonna work. So we're gonna get a new seal, install the back bearing and pack the bearings first, and I'll show you how I do that. And then we put it back on the truck. Once you get your bearings all cleaned out, and I just use mineral spirits in my solvent tank here, you should be able to look down in there and make sure there's not a bunch of trash and stuff down inside the wheel bearing. You're not gonna be able to see it on camera, so I'm not gonna try to show you. And then what I do, I don't have one of those fancy grease packer things, so I just take and pump some grease to my hand like that, and then you're just going to take your bearing and you're going to tap it on the back side against your hand like that until you start to see grease coming out the front of it. See the grease coming out of the front of that there? And you do that all the way around. That lets you know that you've got the bearing completely full of grease all the way around. There you go. You can see we've got grease coming out of the front of the bearing all the way around. So then I just kind of spread it all around and get everything all lubed up, and then drop it right in there. And then all this grease, I mean, as long as it's not dirty, I just put it all on the inside. So we're gonna kind of fill this hub full of grease before you put it on anyway. So that way you don't have to waste all this grease that's all over your hands. Once you got your bearing installed, you'll have to put a new grease seal on. I always replace them, they're not that expensive. And then you need to find something that will catch just the outside edge of the seal, and this is not perfect. The better you can just get the outside edge of the seal, the better you are, because you're trying to drive that in without disturbing the inside of the seal. So then you put it in there. And you just want to drive it down as flat as possible and make sure it's sealed all the way around. And then I always check to make sure it's not interfering with my bearing. After that, all you have to do is grease your outer bearing and then kind of fill your hub full of grease and put it back on the spindle. Now that we've got this all greased up and cleaned up, you're gonna slide it right on there. Washer goes with the keyway in the slot. And since this is new bearing races, I'm gonna leave this a tiny bit tighter than I probably normally would, just because those are gonna wear in and loosen up a little bit. And what I always do is I tighten it down tight like that and then back it off a little bit. There is definitely a torque spec somewhere for that, so you'll probably want to look that up. That goes in, then you install the cotter pin like that. Since what we're talking about here is whether or not you can use these small bolt pattern rotors on a later model truck, I'm gonna say yes. Everything looks like it's lining up good. The rotor's not hitting anything. I don't have brake pads in the caliper yet, but it looks like it's in the same place it was before. The bearings fit nice and tight. There's no wobble. And as you can see, our depth of our bearing races was good and in the right place for this spindle, because the nut went on, everything tightened up the way it's supposed to be, and it all fits nice and good and it turned. And then once you have your rotor on, it's always a good idea to clean any oil or anything that got on this rotor, both from them machining it and from you touching it, off with brake cleaner before you put your brake pads on. I've heard if you have oil on there, it can cause your brake pads to glaze and cause them to squeak. So always make sure you get all the oil off with some good brake cleaner before you put your pads on. After that's all together, you put your dust cap on, and these can be a fight. Sometimes they go really easy, so let's see how this one goes. You just want it to go on nice and flat. And then I just take a flat punch. Sometimes they don't actually seat tight, but as long as it's in there, it's not coming out, it should be good. Once you have the rotor on, it's time to compress the caliper, and this is not the way I recommend doing this, but I don't have a bigger C-clamp. They sell a special tool, or if you get a bigger C-clamp, you can put your inner brake pad in there, but I don't have one. So I'm just gonna press on the piston, and this may cost me a caliper, because if you push out the back of that piston, it's no good, obviously. So we're just gonna lightly press on it, and you should see the piston move down as I do that. And if you have a car with anti-lock brakes, you wanna open the bleeder screw and vent this old brake fluid into a waste container, because if you don't, you're gonna push that dirty, contaminated fluid back into your ABS pump, and that's really not good for them. So that should be good there. And then the last thing you want to check before you put this together is that your caliper slides in this groove nice and easy. That one feels pretty good, so we'll go ahead and use some of the silicone lubricant that came with our brake pads. We're just going to put a little on each one of these ears, on the top and the bottom. The jury's out on this lubricant. I don't usually use any on these old trucks because there's no seal here. So if dirt gets in here, it can stick to that lubricant, and this filled with dirt is not gonna move as easy as it would with no lubricant at all. So I'll let you know how this turns out, or actually, I will make a video if it doesn't work. If it does work, I'm probably not gonna say anything. Now it's time to put our brake pads on. The first one you wanna put on is the inner, and you can tell it's the inner because it doesn't have the hooks that go around the caliper. And you'll just have to hold the caliper out of the way, and this slides right down into the grooves where the caliper sits. Then you hook your outer brake pad on the caliper itself, and this should just slide right down into place. Once it's in place, you get your caliper retaining hardware, which is these 4 little pieces of metal and 2 bolts. And this piece, this spring here, actually sits against the caliper, and it's what holds the caliper down and keeps it from popping off there. So you put the spring on, and then you put the little clip that kind of positions everything in there on the top, and then you do the same thing on the bottom one down here. And then you go ahead and tighten these bolts up. Now that we have a 5 on 4.5 bolt pattern, we just have to find some wheels, but it's flat. So I don't want to use that one, plus there's not one on the other side. Can't use this one, I don't think it's gonna hold air. These are trailer tires anyway. That's the old bolt pattern. Definitely not taking tires off my little enclosed trailer, but I think we can use the ones off my boat. They're holding air, they're brand new tires. These are the right bolt pattern, so that's what we're gonna use. See you soon.